Hello, everyone. Welcome to Aviaya University and our Breaking Free from Abandonment and Betrayal curriculum. I'm Mike Allen, and this is my partner, Andy Anderson. We're the founders of Aviaya and the online communities A Course in Miracles Village and Enlightenment Village.
Today's teaching from AVAIYA University and Sue Marriott and Ann Kelly, it explores abandonment through the lens of modern attachment theory and strategies to free yourself from your unconscious past. You will discover what modern attachment theory is and what it has to do with abandonment and betrayal, how modern attachment theory can help you understand how you respond to things like fear, rejection, and betrayal, and where you are on the spectrum of attachment. All of these insights and more are in this powerful teaching from AVAIYA University, Sue Marriott and Ann Kelly. We hope you enjoy and apply these insights in your life and share them with your friends and family.
And from all of us at Aviaya, enjoy your journey and thank you for letting us be on it with you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Breaking Free from Abandonment and Betrayal. I am your co-host, Andy Anderson. I am the co-founder of Aviaya Media and Enlightenment Village with my partner, Ike Allen. And thank you so much for joining us again. In this event, we are talking with some really great people. We're talking with therapists, doctors, authors, podcasters, relationship experts, and more. And they are sharing with us their tools and strategies to let go of our experiences of abandonment and betrayal, so ultimately we can live peaceful, empowered lives. So today, our guests are going to talk about abandonment through the lens of modern attachment theory, as well as strategies to free yourself from your unconscious past. So please welcome two fabulous ladies, Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. Hi there.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Pleasure is mine. I'm so excited to dive in with the two of you. And I first want to tell everyone a little bit about you and then we'll get started. So Sue and Ann are both psychotherapists in Austin, Texas. I love Austin. And together they co-host the top-rated podcast and online community called Therapist Uncensored. They bring decades of training and experience as well as cutting-edge research about modern attachment and neuroscience to their clients and listeners. And together they share a mission for building security around the world, one episode at a time. Therapist Uncensored now has over 500,000 downloads in 273 countries. First off, how long have you been doing this? How long has this podcast been around?
We're in our third season, so it's been about 2.5 years.
Oh,
so
awesome.
It's been a ride, a really fun one, actually. But
yeah, well, that's awesome. You know, one of our other speakers, Christine Askew, I don't know if you actually know her, but she was the one who pointed me to you. I never actually told you that, but I found you through her because she was like, oh my gosh, these ladies do this amazing podcast. So we just had to have you on.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Christine, wherever you are. So
awesome. So first question. So I know that your podcast focuses a lot on this topic of modern attachment and brain science. So could you tell us from this perspective, how do our early, childhood experiences of abandonment impact us throughout our lives?
Good question. Want me to jump?
yeah, go ahead.
So the general gist, and let me ask you a question real quick. On some of the other programs that people will have listened to, what do you think that people will have a general idea of attachment already? Or should I'm wondering how much detail to go in?
I think that you should go into a little bit of detail because I would say the vast majority of our listeners are everyday people, not necessarily therapists or experts in this. So please do dive into a little detail there.
That's perfect. And that's exactly who we love to talk to on the podcast too. It's both therapists and just folks that are, we think of the smart, interested, lifetime learners. So the idea is that very early on, there are these, we're born into the world and we're all amygdala, which is basically, we're all, just have a tiny little brain, and which basically means what that structure does is fear. And so we're basically born scared to death. We have no way to calm ourselves down. And we rely on our parents, and by then we hopefully have developed our higher functioning, the cortex and everything, that helps the baby soothe themselves. And when it goes well, we encode that all into our body, and it makes the way that we see ourselves positive, generally, or realistic. And then it basically lays down a template that the world is a safe place. Now, where we are interested too is that when it goes wrong, it can go wrong in a couple of different ways. And the research, and by research, I mean decades, many, many years of longitudinal research. It's very solid data that shows that, and here's like a cool statistic, that when you're pregnant, the baby, they can predict the attachment style of the baby before the baby's born, if they know the attachment style of the parent, and not only that, of the grandparent. Just the grandparent can predict the attachment style of the baby. So it's got a very strong, that how you're raised, it's not perfect, thank heavens, because there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of opportunity for change, which is part of why we are interested in getting the science out there, is our brains are neuroplastic is what they call it, which is that it's always developing and growing, and there's a ton of hope. But basically, so the short version is the attachment is the map that's laid down very early on before we can remember about is the world safe or unsafe. And just one more addition to that, if it's unsafe, we tend to, and this is universal, everybody will tend to do a few things that the body biologically knows how to do to make itself safe. And the rough idea is, on one hand, we withdraw and we shut information out in order to stay safe. And this is just, again, just very simplifying. And then on the other hand, we get very anxious and we hang on. We hang on very tightly. And then that will, again, without intervention or without close relationships, that those strategies end up following us through life, but we don't know it. We don't realize that we either see ourselves negatively, bad self, or we're okay, but the world is really scary and those people are really screwed up out there. So that's the quick framework of attachment theory.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. I learned a lot right there because I know a lot about it. Anne, did you have anything to add to that question at all?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. So I love what she's saying, and to add to that, a lot of that is encoded to get our brainy, nerdy selves to add a little bit. It's encoded through our nervous system. So as she mentioned, we're just born all nervous system, and we have to grow into how then to regulate ourselves. So a lot of times when people think about attachment, in fact, if we said, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about attachment? What would you say?
I guess like maybe like it could be like I honestly, I don't know. That's a great question. I have like two thoughts coming into my mind. Like, honestly, like in our line of business, we talk a lot about like spiritual attachment. So I was thinking of it in that way, which is totally different than like psychological as far as I know. So that's what popped into my head.
Awesome. Well, if we had a longer time, we would talk about the fact that they're not so different, but
okay.
I love what you said. Well, a lot of people think of attachment parenting. Okay. And then when they think about attachment parenting, they think about this really sweet picture of mama holding a baby. Right. And that's what attachment is. And that's an element of it. But I think what's really important for our discussion today about the experience of abandonment and betrayal is attachment is actually about how one learns how to handle distress and stress. And so how our caregivers respond to that, as Sue was mentioning, is the part through neuroception, which means our nervous system is designed to pick up everything from your eyes, from the way you look, the way you smell.
Yeah, it's looking for safety.
It's looking for safety. We need safety, and the caregiver is the one that's going to say if we're safe or not and how to do that. And it's based on that we, through research and now through what we're talking about, you fall into some attachment categories. So I think we should mention those. And that means, which is kind of amazing, and all the billions of people on the earth, really this research has shown about 4 primary attachment strategies. And you think, how is that? There's so many different personalities. And that's because it's biology. There's so many ways that our nervous system connects and then learns how to regulate itself based on other people. Are you safe? Do I use a relationship to help calm me down? Or do I learn in that youngest relationship through feelings of betrayal or abandonment that using somebody else isn't safe? Mm-hmm. I've got to just kind of rely on myself.
Zip up.
Right.
And that impacts us in so many ways. So that's part of it. Obviously, there's so much more to talk about in that. But in terms of today's talk, what we want to talk about is sort of really understanding how this baseline impacts how we get into relationships and how we experience loss and feelings of betrayal.
And spirituality, possibly.
And spirituality.
Got it. Well, let's dive into that then. So how does this all work?
How about I start and then you pick up with that?
All right.
Is that okay? What we've done is we've developed, now the hard research, because researchers like to categorize, it tends to be in quadrants. You know what I mean? You're this or this or this. And also it's not diagnostic, so it doesn't say anything about any particular person. But the truth is, what we found clinically, and when we reflect on this in our own life, is we're not just one thing. And so we've shifted it to talk about, instead of it being a trait of like, that's who you are, that label, that we are all of these things at different times. So we talk about states of mind, states rather than traits. So it's more, what's nice about that is more movable. And so we created a little colorful chart to explain some of this. So I hope this will be helpful. And for listeners out there, this will be available to you. Doesn't cost you a penny. And that way you can follow up on it and look at it more closely. But the gist of it is, you want to start? You want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, the gist of it.
Oh, wait, we got to do it up a little
Okay,
bit.
this is,
There it is.
and we're going to help in the attachment spectrum.
Okay.
And in the attachment spectrum, like you said, and when people research this and they look at themselves and they think, oh yeah, we do tend to primarily lean and rely on, because of our early relationships, rely on certain strategies that we develop really well as infants, and we tend to play those out through adults. And depending on how you were raised, and if you were raised with a lot of security and a lot of confidence that your caregiver could really be there, your whole autonomic nervous system regulates around that. And so there's a way that then you can respond to stress. So attachment is around stress. So if we have that, you end up being in a more secure category, which we call green.
Green means yay.
Means
Go green.
Go green, because your body's ready to handle stress and it's in betrayal.
Okay.
And as you're
having to do it backwards.
Yes, if you were born, if you were raised in a way where there's different styles, where maybe your caregiver was not really available to you for whatever reason, at least to your distress. And sometimes parents, for whatever reasons, get overly distressed about kids having negative emotions, and they try to shut them down.
So, and one of the things that's important is we're not blaming parents here, because if we were doing that, we could blame the grandparents, right? That, like, this isn't parent blaming, but it is really trying to have an empathetic, accurate understanding of our early lives, or of your early life, and how it impacts our adult relationships.
Right.
So
That's a good way to put it. Yeah,
that's right. So if your parent, and as she's saying, that if for some reason that they're really unavailable, primarily unavailable, and that could be depression, it could be substance use, it could be any number of things, an event that has happened that takes mom out of it for a little while. If the child has kind of given up hope, then of course what we do is we zip up and we're like, well, I don't need anybody. And I will think rather than feel, right?
Right. So what we're talking about is moving over. Then
Blue.
you might primarily land, especially in times of distress, in what we call blue, but the science would call dismissing kind of attachments. You might have a dismissing attachment style. And so in a dismissing attachment style, like Sue is saying, you end up kind of dropping to a more,
it's parasympathetic, if that matters. Basically, it's like your nervous system, disassociation is part of that, or avoidance, withdrawal. We go low.
we cool down our nervous system.
Yeah.
That's why it's good. But what's really important is this also just looks like people that might find rational thinking more important and be a bit dismissive of people's feelings. So someone in this that lands in this when relationship breakups, for example, happen, they might be going, oh my God, that person was so ridiculously emotional. They were never really very rational. And then you kind of zip up and feel yourself as really in tune. Mm-hmm. And why don't you talk about that? There's the
so that's the blue side. The red side, as one can imagine, is hot. We get pretty hot. We have a lot of feelings. We're trying to hang on. Usually the history of this, and again, we keep tying this back to abandonment and betrayal because this was very early letdowns, basically. On the blue side, we don't want to feel disappointed again. And often, not always, but the experience with someone who, we call it leans red and leans blue, to allow for that we can move. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this, and you love to talk about this, is if I'm with somebody that's more anxious and more preoccupied and is texting me and it's like, why haven't you texted me back and stuff like that, guess what I'm going to do, right? Is I'm going to probably start cooling off and getting a little blue. And the same thing happens in reverse, that I'm just using texting as an example, you text and you don't hear from them. And then you're like, what? And you text again. And then maybe they say like, what? Like I told you, it's kind of like, I told you I loved you. Why do I have to tell you again? You know, I'll let you know when it changes. It's that kind of feeling, but it can get somebody to be more, like if somebody pulls away, it can actually evoke more clingy, needy behavior, which is kind of on the red side. So the red typically is associated with, it's called sympathetic activation, which basically means we're aware, you know, it's the opposite of the super calm, you know, it's a little like a mouse or something, you know what I mean? Like we're aware of a lot, and we're very focused on the outside. We're not very reflective because that we're in threat. And again, I go red, green, blue all the time. I think we all do. Listeners, I don't know kind of which part that you're imagining yourself leaning towards.
I lean a lot towards, I think the orangish reddish, a lot of when I recognize my abandonment issues coming up, it's like cling, 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 you know, so, yep.
And one of the reasons I love what you said, one of the reasons that you're feeling the cling is literally that you're feeling, as you even said it, you could feel your body, you kind of did your body tense. And one of the reasons you kind of feel it is that because, which would take a long time to explain, but because of what happened and how it registered in your nervous system, when stress happens, you feel an alarm state. And so because the alarm state,
everybody.
Right. So the alarm state means I got to reach out to the world and like, wait, I feel alarmed. So, and one of the tendencies we do when we get too activated in this is that we actually then look at the world and try to calm it down so that we can feel calm, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You're gonna identify. And one of the important things on the red side is that we get upset, but it's harder to soothe us. So like, let's say I'm upset that my partner is late and then they come home and then I'm still upset that they're, you know what I mean? But we're versus like my problem is solved. The person is there and they're happy to see me. You know what I mean? So especially as we go further red, we get harder to reach, harder to soothe. And the research shows that the babies that have parents that were inconsistent, like the blue is where they just had given up hope. The red, there's hope and disappointment, and hope and disappointment. And so there's a little bit of a grabbing on. And again, if anybody's out there that's identifying with any of the colors on this, it doesn't mean, we're not necessarily saying something about your personal history. We're just saying the research suggests that if your nervous system tends to do this under threat, you may have had this in the background. Just something to think about. That's what we were wanting to do, is help people not take it so personally. Like if, you know, these aren't cold fish. They're people that are actually afraid of relationships, but this is the cool thing. See, I identify a little more. I'm a recovering blue. And so it's a cool defense because when we're in it, we don't need anybody. We're fine. You know, people will recognize this, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But the problem with it is this is not security. We think it's security because we're not feeling a lot, but it's actually insecurity because we're not able to be close. And as a matter of fact, we can feel intruded upon and threatened when people want to go close to us when we're here. That's a sign that it's insecure versus in the green right there. You want to talk a little bit about that? And because and the reason we want to focus on this just really quickly to set this up is this is where we're moving. If you find yourself on any part of the spectrum that's not green, we're going to talk more about how to move towards a more balanced, secure state. So what does that look like?
Yeah, well, what a balanced, secure, we've been talking about that the blue is kind of overemphasizes the intellectual, and actually because feelings are threatened, you cut it off. And the red, you're more focused on the feelings, and because you get so elevated, you can't really kind of put your thoughts into action. Our goal and what we're talking about here is how to move yourself into the green. And some of us live more in the green than others. And the green means that you get to integrate both, right? It's you can feel the thoughts, you know, you can feel the feelings, but also connect to the integration of your mind. And you can say, God, and that's the time when you're more calm with maybe your partner. You've had a fight the night before and you're way over here and maybe he or she's way over here. And then the next day you kind of, and now you're like, okay, and I can talk about it. That would be sort of a state. process. And I think most of us out there can relate to something like that.
How we flip our lid when we're upset.
So part of what we're trying to say is what's really important in the discussion about abandonment and betrayal. Like the green is where we'll describe the green, and then we're going to talk about how to land there when you kind of find yourself on the outside. So thinking and feelings integrated. You have more of a concept of yourself and others. Sometimes when we're too activated over here, one of the biggest things we're doing is we're protecting our sense of self. When somebody falls over here, they tend to feel, they have a high, they kind of drop down, they tend to fear here the loss of self. They're fear because they become so
fear as an F-E-A-R.
Yes. So they become overly self-reliant on themselves and under rely on other people. We're on the red. When we're over here, we tend to really be fearful of rejection. So given those two things, when you're in the green, you kind of get to have a balance of that. You kind of feel interdependent. You can kind of take care of yourself and really hold the other person. And so if we think about it in terms of abandonment and betrayal, which is a huge aspect of stress and and even trauma in one's body, if we think about it that way, think about how it would affect your nervous system. And in doing that, it's going to impact you. It could impact you in a highly activated way, but it actually could impact you to where you fall over here in a realm where then you start to maybe devalue relationships in general, or guard or protect yourself and not want to come close. Man, I'm not doing that again. That felt horrible. I'm going to be over here. Or it could be, I can't stand abandonment and I'm so activated. So where you fall, if you think about it in that way, that's part of our...
We've been going on for some time, so I'm wondering,
that's true.
Questions, or that was really nice. It's very appealing to try to move green.
No, I love it. Thank you. It's a fabulous explanation, and I'm sure everyone watching right now is feeling the same way. I love the visual representation. I think that helps definitely me get a handle on what ways I'm over here and what ways I'm over there. And I hope everyone listening, is also getting those same breakthroughs. So one thing that comes up is, I think a lot of people don't even realize, when they're in fear of being abandoned, and this can really unconsciously rule their life. And it's certainly something I've dealt with for, pretty much, well, I guess my entire adult life, like most people, right? But it wasn't until really I met my partner, Ike, that I became aware of it about 9 years ago. And he started, helping me, recognize these things. So how do you suggest people become aware of that? Or how do they start to know, oh my gosh, I've been living in fear. That's what this is. This feeling inside of me is me being afraid of being left or abandoned.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question.
No, that's a great question. And it sometimes you don't even realize that you're feeling fear is what you're saying. And Sue mentioned that earlier. Sometimes if somebody tends to anchor more in the blue because of the way of their early abandonment, they don't actually let themselves experience fear. They feel very confident over here. So, and yet what we're trying to help people recognize, so if you tend to find yourself some of the signs that you're in the blue, and that you anchor over here, maybe that you you keep yourself in rationality, and you find yourself having lots of criticalness or feeling critical about other people's emotions, or you find yourself really self-reliant.
They're so needy.
Yeah, that's what you might say. You might say about why every time I get involved with somebody, they're so needy.
So needy. It's the eye roll is the clue, right?
That's so good.
And I love what you're saying, because it's again, there's no perception of threat. We're fine. But I would say the red, when we get preoccupied, and everything doesn't boil down to red and blue, of course.
Right.
But when we are on this state where we're a little bit trying to hold on, it's the same thing as a lot of times we feel done to, versus feel like when I get preoccupied, again, I'm not necessarily conscious that I'm afraid. I'm just conscious that somebody did something to me that I need to tell them what they did and how to make me feel better. But if we can, so some of the strategies is can we begin to slow down? And there's this concept in neuroscience called name it to tame it, which basically means when we can, I don't want to get into the structures, but basically when our higher mind can reflect and begin to for example, I didn't know what jealousy was. And someone close to me one time when I was just like, and they did this and they did that, you know. So that's an example. I wasn't aware, I was afraid of losing someone or being left. Instead, like, it came out in this more angry way of like, they did this and they did this. And then somebody named it and they said, Sue, you're jealous. And I was like, what? You know, but that from then on, it's like, okay, name it. It brought me back into my body. And then and feeling the threat, it's a lot more vulnerable to feel the threat than to enact these strategies to keep the threat away.
Right.
So we feel you for those of you that it's hard to actually identify it.
Well, and let me add to that, because I was somewhat add to that. I was speaking about like how you even recognize you're in the red to even jump in that is maybe that you feel your body activated and you feel yourself moving quickly between feeling, like what you're saying about it, between feelings and actions.
Right.
And it's a super quick connection. I had this feeling, and a lot of times we need to talk a lot, or I need to talk to you now. And there's a high level of activation, which is the red, which feels like you might carry a level of impatience with you and need to activate.
Sometimes we get demanding over there.
I laugh.
Believe me, I imagine lots of people are relating. But so for like slowing down, getting in touch with our bodies.
Or ways of intervening.
Yeah.
And actually, I think what you're saying is slowing down and getting in touch in your body is also a way to recognize which side you might lean on, because sometimes, you know, if you don't slow and get, like, this individual may not realize when they need to be actually relying on somebody, and we're mentioning that they don't really experience their feelings, but you put them in a place of vulnerability, and all of a sudden they can feel an activation of their anxiety where they often don't feel it. And so kind of thinking about it for yourself, like when you feel hurt or when you think of your partner, do you feel like you get really, really rational, or do you kind of lose your thinking when you get upset and you're kind of activated in your body really fast to act? That's one way of recognizing.
Right, because if you are in a grounded, secure state, there's no rush typically. It's easier to tell the difference between spinny thoughts, you know, versus like this inner knowing. We can be compassionate to the other person. We care how we come across, and we lose that when we get a little more in fear. So that would be another sign of like helping someone become aware. Like, this is the person I love the most in the world. Why do I not care in this moment about how they're doing or that they're crying or whatever it is? Mm-hmm. That's another sign that maybe we're scared.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned was spinny thoughts, which reminds me of another question I'd love to ask you. So I'm sure most everyone can relate to those times when we're in fear of abandonment or whatever, someone's going to leave us, and we just get stuck in these ruminating negative thoughts, and it just like it kind of rules our world. So what strategies do you recommend for people to, you know, get out of that cycle?
Well, I think that's hard for all of us most of us, I guess, for different times. There's different strategies, I think, but one of the ones I'm going to add to is what we were just speaking of, is as you recognize those negative thoughts, one of the things that's promoting that is a feeling of anxiety or a feeling inside that you're not letting yourself have, and that you might feel this feeling of shame. And so one of that is allowing yourself to feel those thoughts and really accept them. Oftentimes what people have when they're having those negative, shameful, those negative thoughts about themselves, they also then feel the sense of anger that they're doing that, or that they can't get out of the loop. And so it creates even more and more anxiety. And so I think actually slowing down and recognizing that you're having them, and then nurturing yourself, because one of the most important ways to move towards the green, and all of these activities moving towards the green will actually reduce your need for that. And that is to slow down. And the biggest thing is to feel nurtured inside yourself. And you have to start with nurturing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Right. I think that one of the things we said about feeling the feeling is really big, because if you think about it, if we could bear whatever it is we're avoiding feeling, or even bear feeling lonely, basically particularly the negative feelings like shame, humiliation, vulnerability. If we could sort of square our shoulders and just like begin to explore it instead of dodging it, it's just nature's way of flooding our body with information to protect us. That's all it is. And nobody's died from a feeling, I don't think. We haven't heard of it anyway. Right. So that the training of self-compassion, mindfulness, it only lasts seconds, maybe 2 minutes. If you actually really square, and it typically is like a wave. And if you can just float or surf the wave, then it will subside or it'll transform a little bit. And then again, you're going to be more likely to be in that window of tolerance, meaning that we have our thinking online and we have our bodies and our feelings online, so that we can be compassionate and empathetic to other people. And like you're saying, Anne, huge to ourselves. Right. Anybody in things like, to say something like this to yourself, anybody in a situation like this would be anxious. You know, it's kind of like connecting to other people. Like, this is okay. Like, it's just, I'm nervous. I'm scared that my son is going to leave me. And so that's why I'm tracking him on, you know what I'm saying?
Losing your child.
Losing your child, or being seen as a bad mom. So that's why I'm overly doing something that, like in a different setting, I would say, this is not a good parenting strategy. But then when it's live, so if I could feel like he may leave and I'm going to be okay, you know, he needs the lunch. Obviously, it's just teenagers.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying, though? It's like going to that deeper place of what's driving that feeling and being able to just drive right through it or flow right through it. You'll get to the other side, and then we're not dodging and weaving around the world and ourselves. But I think, as Anne said, and I'm sure that y'all have talked about on these series, self-compassion being really, really important, because if we're saying that some of this has to do with early injury, then basically it's giving ourselves what we never got, you know, giving ourselves a break, getting off our back. The question was about the spin. It's like, sometimes I do think of like sticking a stick in a spoke or something, you know what I mean? It's like, stop it. But even that, like, even if we can identify, oh, I'm just spinning now.
That's
right?
really.
That already, it takes the wind out of the sails. So that's the name it to tame it.
Oh, got it.
The last thing I'm going to add to that is that's one reason why we believe it's so important to learn about attachment. Because it really enhances this whole thing. If you can recognize, oh, I'm doing this for this really important reason, because these strategies we learned as infants were really healthy. I mean, there was a reason.
They were adaptive.
They were very important, very adaptive. So as we grow up and we're still doing them, it's really important to realize that was very adaptive then, and that's why you do it. It's not because you're weak, or it's not because. And so by recognizing, by educating yourself, I would really say educate yourself about your own attachment patterns. There's lots to educate out there. And then you can actually, like you said, when you got married, you went, oh, wait, because it's in our primary relationships and romantic relationships that we learn so much, because those mimic that bond that you had as an infant. And so things come out that you don't expect. And if you learn and you go, oh, wait, the reason I continue to expect rejection and abandonment, and so I'm always negative on that way, is deep down. It's not just because people expect themselves to just say, stop doing that. And I can't tell you as a psychologist how often, like, I keep doing this, and I don't care how many times I tell myself not to, I do it. And we're like, of course, you are a creature of deep habit. If we could change ourselves every day because we read a book, we would be scary people.
Whoa.
but at the whole goal of like being able to recognize it, and that helps you get out of a loop, because you go, oh, like Sue was saying, you feel like, oh, you can relate to a lot of people. We can go, oh yeah, we relate to your red and her blue, and that somehow there's such peacefulness.
It's non-shaming.
It's connecting the core, and I know I'm sure much of it, that the whole part of the deepest part is connecting. And it's connecting to yourself and other people. So if you can connect, this is natural, and that other people do it, and that you need other people to help you stop doing it, it so helps you get out of that loop.
Yeah, I love all of that. I particularly love the name it to tame it and how you applied that, Sue, to this conversation as far as like the visual of the stick and the spokes. That's a great way of, or, great way of thinking about it. And just like exactly what you're saying, right? You become aware of it. You're like, you call it out. Oh, I'm spinning. Thoughts are spinning. This is happening right now.
We have on our website, I guess on our Facebook page, there's a picture that's the thought bubble that says, it's not me, it's my amygdala.
We have T-shirts that say that.
We used to, we don't anymore. But for that same reason, that's the same thing. It's like, oh, this is just a biological impulse that I'm freaking out. It's not actually that I'm just a weirdo.
Yeah, that actually brings me to the question of, I wanted to ask you guys about self-abandonment, and it sounds like what you're talking about is not abandoning ourselves, right? Paying attention to how we're thinking and feeling and all of that. So could you dive a little bit into what self-abandonment is? This seems to be a topic that people are talking about a lot these days.
I think self-abandonment happens so often. I'm going to go from our attachment perspective, but self-abandonment happens in different ways for different types of attachment styles. As we're talking about somebody who leans blue or dismissing attachment, part of the self-abandonment is that they get so self-reliant that they abandon their whole emotional internal self. And so they cut it off from the most richest part of their resource, and that we need this and it's so important. And so they abandon themselves with too much logic and they miss the richness. And then they become over-reliant on self and they abandon the connection that they need. We all need connection for survival. To say, I don't need it, means you're not feeling it, because we all need it. So if you think you don't need it, that's a sign that you really want to turn in and you're abandoning yourself, because we cannot thrive without connection. And if we believe we don't need it, we're really abandoning the deeper part of ourselves.
Right.
And I think that you want to talk about it.
Well, just to follow, so that if we're activated up, which is the sympathetic system,
the red,
that we can, it's still an abandonment of the self. It looks like that we're really interested in relationships when we're leaning in that side, but the truth is, it's very hard to take us seriously when we're on the ceiling. You know what I mean? And when our voices are loud and we're kind of speaking in hyperbole and things like that, and it feels like the sky is falling. So that isn't even though it looks like connection and that I'm trying to take care of myself, it's actually an abandonment, because we're kind of, remember earlier I said that we're actually hard to soothe when we're over there?
Yeah.
That's another example of abandoning the self, is versus if we can take ourselves seriously and come down from the ceiling and really go in and like, what is it that I actually need? What are other reasons that this thing may have happened? So I include their perspective.
Right.
Then weirdly, it's like by including their perspective, that helps me not abandon myself. Because when I'm in fear, I'm gone. But like when I can, from that side, when I can think about the other person, then I can get grounded again, which is that green basically is where we have not abandoned ourselves. So.
Oh, I love that. And one of the ways of recognizing that too, is that can be somebody that's almost overly caregiving of other people. That's another way to recognize it, is that because of our fear of our own abandonment, what we end up doing is saying, oh, to not be abandonment, I need to please and soothe other people, and I have to be what they think they need, so that then they won't abandon me. And that's kind of echoing what she's saying. It becomes a loss of the self. It may feel beautiful because we get so much reward when we caretake other people and we're doing for them, and it's so rewarding, but if we're doing that and unaware of our own needs for it and unaware of ourselves, it's another element of self-abandonment. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that just relates to codependency, which is another topic that we have dove into a lot over at Aviaya, and how much it ties into abandonment issues and why we do what we do. So awesome. So we are running a little low on time, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to talk about a webinar that you guys have for everyone. So there's actually a button below this video right now that you can head on over. Yep, right down there. Head on over to your website and take this webinar with you. So tell us what this is.
So basically, we're going to do a 2-hour, go into a lot more depth about this kind of material, provide handouts, worksheets, and share with everybody more of the how-tos, what to do next, basically. And very cool for if you're hearing about this webinar and this, type in the promo code AVAIYA. And we will give you a discount on the thing because we want to you've already heard this, so it'll be much easier to go forward. And we want to really appreciate you for bringing this on. So for sure, we would like to invite you to join us and do so at a discount.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, everybody. So Sue gave you that URL and you can type that in, or you can just click the button below, which is super easy, and head on over. So we'll have that hyperlinked for you. That's super simple. And then yes, you'll have a coupon code AVAIYA, and I'll have that right below this video also, so you can just copy and paste that. So it's super easy to spell for you. So are there...
And I guess I just would also like to invite people to tune into the podcast, because we go into much more depth about all kinds of things. We bring in expert guests, incredibly amazing people. We're so fortunate. And it also keeps us up to date with our thinking, so it keeps us kind of crisp. But anyway, that you can find it on iTunes, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Alexa, even if you could say.
I know, isn't that fun?
Play Therapist Uncensored, and Play Therapist Uncensored podcast, and it'll pop up. So that's really fun.
Some people say that they've done that to their spouses. They were in the kitchen doing dishes, and they say, "Play Therapist Uncensored episode dismissing attachments."
Excellent. Yes, and we'll have a link to your podcast below too, so people can click through also and check you out and subscribe. And I love it. It's just this, and everybody, please do, if you're inspired by Sue and Ann's work, please check them out. Check out their podcast, their website, join them in the webinar, because obviously this conversation goes way deeper than when we've been able to go today. So I really appreciate it. And are there any last insights from either of you before we hop off?
Well, I don't know. Well, this is where you can get a bunch of insights, and again, for free for everybody, is we actually are a Therapist Uncensored podcast and online community. And we have a really active Facebook page where both a public one and a private one. In the public one, you will find so many links and resources about the relational sciences in general. So that's really big and an easy way to tap in and get more of this kind of information. And then if you're liking it, then certainly go on over to the private and you can request access. And then the community can talk to one another. So that's one of the things we really want to promote, is people with this kind of interest in promoting security and promoting secure relationships to connect with each other.
Awesome.
Which is, I'm really excited about the whole workshop that y'all are doing, because I think we get from Texas that y'all are doing.
Yeah. Well, we're North Carolina, so we say y'all too.
Oh, do you? I didn't know that. So yeah, I think I just saw some of the speakers on there, and having that much just focus on this topic is so exciting for us. And I imagine how giving that is to other people to be able to kind of get such amazing different perspectives on a topic that obviously we find just critical to our health.
Oh yeah, it affects each and every one of us in different ways, and absolutely. So thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into Sue and Ann's interview. And here once again is to our journey to breaking free from abandonment and betrayal. Bye, everybody. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning into this last interview with Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott, who are the co-hosts of their podcast, Therapist Uncensored. Some of the really great take-home messages for me were really this modern attachment theory they talked about. This is something that I've heard about, thrown around over the years, and I've really never explored it much. So I thought this was a really good introduction for me, and I hope for all of you, if you didn't know about it already, into this theory. So we talked a lot about, how experiences from our past can affect us and are affecting us in our adult life right now. And they showed us a really nice spectrum with colors, so we could figure out, right, are we on the more blue side of things, which might be more withdrawing and and not asking people for help and that kind of stuff, versus the more orange-red side of things where we tend to cling on to people. And I thought this was a really great representation of, and a nice visual for how we can look at our abandonment issues and when they come up. So a couple of other things I wanted to mention were this name it to tame it exercise, so to speak. So I really thought that was great. Name it to tame it. So if you're feeling a certain way, sometimes you just need to name it to tame it. Sometimes you just need to become aware of it and recognize it and be compassionate with yourself that you are feeling jealous or you're feeling fear or whatever it is. Like, for example, she talked, I think it was Sue who talked a lot about, right, our thoughts are spinning, right? So when your thoughts are spinning and you're in all these negative thought patterns and self-doubt and criticism and all that stuff and fear, you can, right, name it to tame it. Recognize that what's happening right now is my thoughts are spinning. And she mentioned, right, putting that piece, that stick right through the spokes of a bicycle as a visual representation of how we can stop that, of how we can step out of that into ultimately being awareness, being aware that this is what's happening. Those thoughts are spinning inside of you. So I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. I really felt it gave me a whole different perspective on why we all have these experiences of abandonment in our life, whether it was physical abandonment as a child or it was inconsistency like they talked about, maybe it was emotional abandonment, that kind of stuff. It really makes sense when you take it back to the root, why it is that we feel the way we feel today or act the way that we act today, and ultimately recognizing that we can be responsible for these ways of being and be responsible for being aware of them and choosing new ways to interact and catching ourselves in these moments and naming it to tame it and all of those things. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.